You have about 90 seconds at the start of a talk to catch someone's attention. Me, in this video, I've got about 3, which means you're either still here with me or you've already left. Goodbye. If you are still with me, you're probably here because you're interested in attention. I'm sure you've been there in a conference talk where someone spends the first 45 minutes talking about themselves, that they live in Lancashire, that they're vegetarian, that they work for Datadog, they love eating pizza, they like to go out running, and then you start to zone out a little bit. You start to think about other. And then you come back a few minutes later and you've just learned that the speaker's favorite breed of dog is a Labrador. Side note, Labradors are awesome, right? As you learned in the last video in this series, the audience member is the hero of the story. You, as a speaker, are simply just a guide guiding the hero on their journey. What does this mean for the opening of your talk, though? What does that mean for how you should start a talk to catch people's attention? Listen on to find out. Hi, I'm James. I'm a storytelling technologist who's passionate about tech, but also about helping you influence, impact, and inspire others with your communication. I've spoken at over 30 conferences all over the world in the last couple of years, and believe me, I've had the same feelings as you. I've given crappy talks. I've given talks where people switch off and start scrolling through their phones. I've even once given a talk where there was someone falling asleep in the front row. I've seen it all, and I want to make sure that you don't have to feel that as well. Which brings us back to this idea of introductions. How do you open a talk, or what's otherwise known as a cold open? And if I take the definition from Wikipedia, a cold open is a narrative technique used in television and film. It's the practice of jumping directly into the story at the beginning of the show before the title sequence or opening credits are shown. Now, I grew up watching the James Bond movies, and they are the perfect example of this. If you aren't familiar with the James Bond movies, whenever a James Bond movie starts, there's always a big, massive action sequence right at the start before anything happens. And then the opening credits roll, where you start to learn about who's in the movie. There's usually some famous singer singing the theme song. Now, the point of this big action sequence is to get your attention. I'm sure if you think of many of your favorite movies or your favorite TV shows, they have a similar structure. They start with something big to catch your attention, and then they get into the meat of the story. Now, think about if it was the other way around. Imagine if a James Bond film started with the credits, which introduced the main actors, the producers, the writers, there's a really nice song over the top of it, and then it jumped into the action sequence. By the time the action comes around, you would probably have already switched off and checked your phone and decided this film's going to be pretty boring. Now, when you consider the fact that when you're a speaker on stage, you are a storyteller, there's some really interesting insight you can take away from the way films and TV shows do things. Now, I'm not saying you need to open with a big acrobatic action sequence, although honestly, if I had the ability to do that, it would probably be a pretty cool way to start a talk, to cartwheel onto the stage and do a backflip. But what you do want to do, though, is to catch people's attention inside the first 60 to 90 seconds of a talk, because that's when the audience is going to decide whether they want to give you their attention or not. The opening of your talk should set up the narrative of the talk. It should tell people exactly what they're going to get out of it. And you should do all of that before you introduce yourself. Now, that will feel weird at first, believe me. But remember, people care about how you're going to make their lives better, not about who you are. That's not to say you shouldn't introduce yourself at all. Once you've set up the narrative, though, once you've had your action sequence, once you've caught people's attention, it's at that point you can introduce yourself. And your introduction is there to really be as short as possible. You should say as few words as possible to establish your credibility. If you're talking about serverless, people don't need you to spend 3 minutes talking about your dog and how much you like cycling. Introduce yourself, set your credibility, and maybe throw in one interesting fun facts just to keep it a little bit. Let me give you 2 examples now of the introductions from the new talk that I'm working on at the minute. This is a talk, the title of the talk is Serverless or Containers, Who Cares? Pick Both. And this is 2 potential ways I could start the talk. All right, hi everyone, let's get started. I'm James Eastham, I'm a serverless developer advocate at Datadog, and welcome to my talk titled Serverless or Containers, Who Cares? Pick Both.
I've been at Datadog now for around 9 months, and before that I spent about 3 years at AWS working in their professional services organisation, where I helped some of the biggest companies on the planet build with AWS services. Now in my role at Datadog, my mission is to help all of you build better serverless systems. In my spare time, I enjoy pretty much anything that gets me outdoors and in the hills or the mountains, whether that be ultra marathons or hiking with my partner. I live in the north of England, which certainly makes getting in the hills a little bit easier. Now, in this talk, I'm going to talk to you about how to choose between serverless functions and containers, the complexities of modern software development, and why you probably need a little bit of functions and a little bit of containers in most of your workloads. How many of you think the product, service, or thing that you're building is complicated? And the thing I really want you to think about now as we get started is where that complexity comes from. Is it complexity in the problem domain itself? Or is it complexity from the fact that you're running a legacy system on a 20-year-old Windows server? Or is it the fact that you chose to deploy it in Kubernetes and now you spend your evenings stressing about your next cluster upgrade and when that's going to come around? At its core, this is a talk about complexity, and modern software development is riddled with it. And by the end of this talk, you're going to walk away with a deeper understanding of exactly how you can build and ship software, focusing only on the complexity that matters to your users, leaving all that other complexity for somebody else to worry about, and how you can ship code using the best choice of serverless functions or containers to make the most impact for your users. I'm James Eastham. I'm a serverless developer advocate at Datadog, a Microsoft MVP and an AWS community builder. Let's get straight into it.
Two very different introductions there, right? And as I'm sure you heard, both getting across pretty similar information for the audience. The difference though, one opens with the action sequence and one opens with the opening credits rolling. My guess is that it was actually quite hard for you to listen to the first one because I rambled on about myself for so long, you probably got bored, maybe you even left the video at that point. Yet this seems to be how many of us, myself included, once upon a time, open our conference talks. You'll also notice that the second one is focused on you. What is the individual audience member going to get out of this talk? Again, it will seem weird at first to jump straight into it without saying anything else. But remember, this isn't about you. The talk isn't about you. It's awful for our egos, but the talk is about the audience. Lean into that discomfort, open with the action sequence, open by catching people's attention immediately, and then come back and establish your credibility. Do all of that, and I promise you will have a much more engaged audience. If you're interested in planning better conference talks, there's a link down in the description below to give you a template to help you plan your talks, as well as 5 things that you should not forget in every conference talk that you plan. In the next video in this series, we're going to talk about how to structure the rest of the talk, how to structure the bulk of the content inside your talk once you've got this introduction out of the way. After that, well, we'll see where we end up. See you in the next one.